better idea to move around. Thank you. Thank you, Pastor Ron, and thank you, everyone, for the opportunity to be here today. I've been with Nautel for about 9 years now. I spent, you going to bring up my presentation, and then I guess I'll advance it, bring up the first, okay, and then I think I can probably advance that here. Let's see. Oh, okay, good. It works. Very good. Works better than it did before the. Okay, good. All right. So I've probably got more slides than we have time. Feel free to interrupt with questions, particularly if it's a quick answer type of thing, a clarification. If it's something that's likely to generate a discussion, maybe hold that to the end, and we can open it up then, or you can see me privately after the meeting. I'm really appreciative of the relationship that we've developed over the past several years, due mainly to the efforts of Rob Branch and Bill as well, in getting our product to work as a solution and getting the gospel out with many of your churches and individual radio stations. So we really appreciate that, and that's why I really kind of jumped at the opportunity to be here. I was a chief engineer myself for about, longer than I care to remember, about 25 or 30 years. I started my radio career in South Carolina as a chief engineer in Spartanburg back in the late 70s. And then I was in Raleigh for several years, and then I keep moving in the wrong direction. I keep moving north, and I end up in Ohio, and I worked for Harris Broadcast, and then I've been with Nautel for about the last 9 years. So Nautel is a company that is based in Halifax, Nova Scotia, in Canada. We also have another factory in Bangor, Maine. We employ about 200 people at the Halifax location, about 50 in Bangor, Maine. In Bangor, Maine, we build mainly the AM product. It's a much smaller factory, but we build mostly the AM product. And the navigational, we do some navigational products, and they're done in Bangor, Maine as well. Been in business for about 48 years, and we have always done solid state. We never built any tube transmitters. So we feel that we have kind of a niche in the market, and particularly have had a lot of success in the last 10 years or so. So we're going to go through the whole product line. Now, some of these products are not going to be relevant to you. I know a lot of you you're predominantly FM and mostly low power. But I'm going to go through the whole product line, and just to give you an idea of what the scope of our products are. And we'll maybe dwell a little bit more time on the stuff that you're most interested in. Okay, so we've got FM transmitters. This is the VS series that probably a lot of you are familiar with, from 300 watts to 2.5 kilowatts. There are 3 models: a 300, a 1 kilowatt, and a 2.5 kilowatt. Those are rack mount transmitters. Once you get above that, you get into transmitters that are in the size of a full cabinet, from 3.5 up to 40 kilowatts. Those are the NVLT and the GV, which are very similar, and we'll talk about the differences between those as we get through this. On AM, we have a 1 kilowatt AM J1000 transmitter, and then higher power AMs from 5 to 50 kilowatts, and actually up to several hundred kilowatts, because internationally we sell. In fact, we just negotiated a sale in Hungary for, I think, a 2 megawatt AM transmitter, which is 2 million watts of AM that's going to be delivered in another 2 years. And we do some small TV transmitters, low power TV, just like there's LP-FM, there's also LP-TV. And we do some LP TV transmitters from 150 watts to 500 watts. The Nautel Advantage 4-year warranty on everything that we sell since 2012 we've had the 4-year warranty. We have extended customer service hours because of the fact that we have customer service people from not only up in Halifax but in the States as well, and we've got a service person as far west as Denver, so we can serve people with customer service even late in the day. We have a parts depot at the FedEx hub in Memphis, which means that we can get things on a plane in the evening for delivery the next morning. We have a phone home factory monitoring service, which we'll talk about a little bit more in detail. It says 47 years, it's 48 years now of engineering excellence. And you're going to hear the term Nautel AUI throughout this presentation. And this is something that carries through on all of our products. So when you hear me refer to AUI, this is what I'm talking about. It's the web-based interface to all of our transmitters. On a couple of the transmitter lines, the higher end, this actually shows up as a touch screen on the front of the transmitter. But on all of them, it's available certainly remotely. And it's kind of the heart and core of the control and monitoring system on all of our transmitters. So from this point on, we won't call it the Advanced User Interface. We'll refer to it as the AUI, but that's what I'm talking about. We'll start with the VS, which many of you are familiar with. Features common to all the VS models. They all have the AUI, which you can connect to remotely if you have an internet connection at the transmitter. They all can take in IP audio in the form of either a shoutcast or a shoutcast stream or axial live wire. The AUI and all of our control systems are based on the concept of presets. And the preset is something that captures all of the settings of the transmitter and configures every operating aspect of the transmitter in a preset. It used to be that presets in the old days just meant frequency and power, but now we capture things like a selected audio input. We capture whether or not the RDS is going to operate. We capture whether or not it's going to operate with an Or band inside or not. All of that's captured in a preset, and you could have upwards of 60 or so presets. So one of the advantages of presets is that if you're using one transmitter as a backup, say, for multiple stations, you can have presets. And if you have to use it in a pinch for another station, you just press another preset, and all the proper configurations come right up. You can have presets also that differ only in nothing but a different power level. So, for example, if for some reason you wanted to have a power level that was lower than your normal power, you could have a half power with all the other parameters remaining the same, and you could just create another preset. We have audio backup by way of USB memory stick. So if you have a thumb drive that you load with MP3 content, you can plug that into the back of the transmitter, and then you're able to configure within the presets a way that if you have silence for some predetermined period of time, like 3 minutes, or if there were silence for 3 minutes, or the modulation dropped below, say 15% for whatever time you specify, it will revert over to the backup content that you have on the USB drive, and you can play hours of content off of the USB as an audio backup. And the way that it plays that is through the concept of playlist, where it uses the USB as a storage device to play back, and for you to set. You all know what a playlist is because you all use automation systems. But this is a mini automation system, and there's a playlist capability within the transmitter to play particular cuts off of the USB in a certain order, or to repeat certain ones at certain frequency and so forth. So that certainly beats having dead air. Let's see. Let's talk about, okay, so more features common to all the VS transmitters. An easy upgrade to HD radio. I know probably few, if any, in here are contemplating HD radio. It's an expensive conversion. Nevertheless, the transmitters are capable of it. Email notifications means that if there's a condition that develops in the transmitter that you want to know about, you can set up so that the transmitter will have its own email address, like a Gmail account, for example, and it will send out an email to your phone or whatever indicating the nature of the fault. With authentication, simply means that email account, it will account for the fact that email will have to log in somewhere with a password, and it has that capability. Sometimes VS transmitters are used as a replacement for an exciter in a higher power transmitter. Some stations have old tube transmitters from the 80s and 90s, and sometimes they use a VS transmitter to replace the exciter or the low power stage in those transmitters. As I mentioned already, you can use them as backups for multiple sites by virtue of the fact that they're all frequency agile and doesn't require any retuning. They all have the Or band inside option. This basically emulates an Orban 5500. Now, if you bought a standalone 5500 audio processor, and in fact, I think Orban has discontinued them now, but if you had bought them, it would probably cost you around $33,000, $3,500 or so for a standalone processor. We take the same software. We reached an agreement with Orban. They provided us with all of the algorithms and software, and then we built the audio card, and so it's an option for $1,200. So for about a third the price, we can put a card, an optional card inside the transmitter that will do your audio processing. Some people still prefer to use an outboard audio processor, but particularly for LPFMs, where the startup cost can be significant, the idea of getting audio processing for $1,200 as opposed to $3,000 or $4,000 is significant. So I would say about half of the VS transmitters that we sell are bought with the Orban Inside option. Also, even if you don't buy the Orban Inside option, a lot of people don't know that the transmitter inherently has a compressor, a peak limiter inside as well, and an AGC, and I've had some customers say that that's actually adequate. They feel that works fine. It's not a multi-band processor, so it's not like the Orban or the Omnia type stuff, but it nevertheless has a built-in audio processor if you choose to activate it. And again, that's something that's activated within the presets. So at the VS300 level, there's a VS300 and a VS300 LP. And if you're an LPFM station operating under LPFM rules, you have to order the LP version because it has an additional certification that's required that we had to get. We had to get an LP certification label. There was a minor change in the hardware build of the transmitter in order to get it certified for LPFM, which makes like a $50 difference in the price. But LPFM stations must use the LP version of that transmitter. Otherwise, they operate pretty much identically. Let's see here. Okay, options and spares in the VS, really not many. The Orban Inside I already mentioned. Surge protectors, we always recommend that solid-state transmitters have a surge protector of some kind. It doesn't have to be ours, but for convenience, we usually list one on our quotes in case you want a surge protector. In terms of voltages, the VS300 is the only one of the VS transmitters that will operate off 120 volts AC. The VS1 and the 2.5 are 220. Now, if you've been buying Nautel or familiar with Nautel for some time, when the VS line first came out in 2010, even the VS300 would only operate at 220. But we've since changed the power supply in there, so it now operates off of 120, so you don't have to buy a step-up transformer anymore. Surge protector is one of the options as well, and then there usually are spares that are listed, spare parts that are listed on the quote as well, if you really want to keep them on the shelf. Talked about Orban Inside a little bit already. It has traditional Orban format presets. So, Orban, with all the research that they've done on audio processing over the years, has come up with certain algorithms that they think work best with certain formats. Like they've got a rock preset and a classical preset and a talk preset and so forth. So if you're totally inexperienced in how to set up an audio processor, you can certainly start with the Orban format presets that are built in and select something that will get you pretty close in the ballpark to what audio processing you need, and then you can certainly customize that and save that as a custom preset to fit exactly the sound that you want. The Orban Inside will work with any and all of the inputs, meaning it'll work with analog inputs, it'll work with AES inputs, it'll work with the shoutcast input. It will not work with a composite because if you're feeding it with a composite, you presumably have already processed it through an external processor. And you can monitor and control the Orban Inside through the AUI, either locally or remotely as well. Let's see here. Okay, so let me talk a little bit about we're going to move up in power now. I'll talk a little bit about the history of our recent history of our FM product line. We had what was called the V series back when I joined Nautel in 2007. In 2009, we updated that and started talking about the NV series, and that was a series that really expanded our range all the way up to 40 kilowatts because our V series had stopped at 10 kilowatts. And the NV was the first product that incorporated the AUI, and that was very, very popular at that point in time. First time we really really created a software-controlled transmitters. None of these transmitters today have any tuning in them. They have no pots to adjust. They have no variable capacitors, anything like that, because everything is pretty much software-controlled. And the NV transmitter was the first one, the first line to incorporate that technology in 2009. 3 years later, 2012 to 2014, new FM amplifier chips or transistors became available, which we call LD MOS, and that made the transmitters a lot more efficient. So we updated the line with the NVLT and the GV, which are both current transmitters now, and we'll talk a little bit about the differences between those. But we're talking about, roughly 300 kilowatts to 3.5 kilowatts to 40 kilowatts at this point. So the powers are 3.5, 5, 7.5, 10. This is kilowatts now. 15, 20, 30, and 40. Now, the reason why some of those model numbers are bracketed like that, when you buy a 3.5, it's really a 5 kilowatt transmitter, but it's software limited to 3.5. So that means that at a later date, if you should decide that you really need a 5 kilowatt transmitter, you got a power increase, you can pay us the difference. We send you a new controller only, and that 3.5 becomes a 5. Same thing with the 7.5 and the 10. They're bracketed for the same reason, the 15 and the 20. And it's only a software controller difference between those. The hardware is already there. So that means that you've got headroom built into those transmitters already for the higher powers. The N, the 30N, we did the same thing with the 30 and a 40 as I just described, but then we ultimately we wanted to create a true 30 because we wanted to create one that's physically smaller, takes up a little bit less footprint. So instead of having 16 modules, it had 12 modules. So we created a 30, and the N stood for narrow, and it was a little bit smaller footprint, lower manufacturing cost for us, a little bit lower price. So we can still make a 30 that's upgradable to a 40, but most often stations that need 30 kilowatt transmitters now want the 30N because that is, because it's a smaller footprint and slightly lower price. Both of these product lines are very similar. They use the same amplifiers, the same power supplies, same AUI to interface both of them. However, only the GV series can do HD radio. The GV is not inherently an HD radio transmitter. In other words, people buy them all the time for analog only, and then they keep open the option of upgrading them to HD radio at a later date. But that is that's one of the main differences between these, that only the GV can do HD radio. Also, the NVLT hits a little bit lower price point because there's some other things on the GV that are taken out of the NVLT, and so it's about 20 or 25% lower in price than a GV transmitter is. So let's talk about the differences between the two. One of the first things that you see right away is that the AUI is on the front panel of the GV, but the front panel of the LT, comparable model, just has an LCD screen. Remotely, the AUI is the same when you connect to them remotely, but at least on the front panel, again, a cost-saving thing to be able to offer it at a lower price. It's just the LCD screen on the LT is more like what you see on the front of the VS transmitter, but remotely it behaves like a VS transmitter where you can get the AUI. So when a customer approaches us about which FM transmitter to buy, our primary question is, do you now or in the future contemplate operating with HD radio? And that's usually the determining factor. If yes, then you got to talk about a GV. If you only need analog, and if lowest price is a priority, then we talk about the NVLT. So a little bit more detailed comparison between the two. The efficiencies in analog are virtually identical. The efficiencies in HD radio, when a transmitter operates HD radio, it's in a different class of amplification, so because it has to be more of a linear amplifier, the efficiency is lower when operating in an HD mode. There's a couple of efficiency numbers there, 57 and 52, where it's operating at different HD injection levels, and so the efficiency is lower. That really doesn't apply to the NVLT. Obviously, the achievable analog power is listed here. When you operate in an HD mode, you cannot get 100% of the nameplate power in analog. You can get 90% of analog power. So a 10 kilowatt transmitter is only good for 9 kilowatts when it's running in a hybrid HD mode at the standard level of minus 14. We use LDMOS technology in both. There are 4 amplifier pallets per module, and then there are 4 amplifier pallets per module in both transmitters. There's no IPA stage in these transmitters. We've eliminated that because with the new LDMOS, they are higher gain devices, so the exciter directly feeds the power amplifiers. Yes?
Can you explain IPA?
Intermediate power amplifier. So typically, on a transmitter, you have an exciter, which is low power, an intermediate power amplifier, which is an intermediate stage, and then a final PA. And those are the 3 basic stages of a traditional FM transmitter. So what we've been able to do in this case is eliminate the middle stage, one less stage to fail because we're able to put higher power out of the exciter, and we have higher gain on the devices. So we've eliminated one stage. Good question. Let's see here. Okay. They both use the same power supplies. The power supplies that we use they're plug-in power supplies made by GE or Lineage. They operate from 90 to 264 volts, and then the same power supply is used throughout the transmitter. One of the differences between them is that we actually put a redundant power supply that's just sitting there idling, waiting for the possibility that one of the other power supplies would fail. For the controller exciter, that redundant supply is there in the GV, but it's an option in the NVLT. Efficiency versus mask optimizer, that's to optimize the efficiency and get the best efficiency possible out of a transmitter when it's operating in HD radio mode. Because in HD radio mode, you create a lot of sidebands, and to some extent, those are allowable within what the FCC calls a mask. A certain amount of those sideband emissions are permissible, and then beyond that, it's considered to be interference. So there's a trade-off between efficiency and the performance of the mask, and we do that automatically in the GV transmitters. RBDS. We introduced this just a couple of years ago, the fact that we have dynamic RBDS with PS scrolling. And we have that in the VS transmitters now, too, with the newest software that's just come out recently. And it obeys the Innovonics command set. So if you want to do title and artist to display automatically, the transmitter can generate the RBDS, provided that your automation system can send the proper commands along with the title and artist information. And we have that ability on both of these transmitters, and as I mentioned, now again on the VS as well.
So dynamic with PS scrolling, what does that exactly mean?
Okay, so traditionally, whoops, let me back up a second here. Back up. What happened here? Got one more, I think. what's going on here, but let's see. Can you put it back?
John, in a dynamic RDS environment, it's a static display, might be your call sign.
Right there.
Right,
Frequency,
okay.
where live scrolling will have now playing data. If you're an alt talk station, consider using that for the name of the speaker, his text for the day, and if he has a P.O. box to respond to, you might even scroll his P.O. box or his website so that they can reach that speaker.
Okay, so traditionally, before we had dynamic RBDS, we had static RBDS, where you would just basically have 8 characters, and you could put in the call letters, and that was about it. But dynamic means obviously that it's changing. All right. Of course, in blue here are all the similarities between the GV and the NVLT. Only the things that are not in blue is where there's a difference. Audio loss, switchback, we have the ability of that in the VS as well. The GV has the ability to switch sources on audio loss and then back again. If the original source comes back, it will switch. It will sense that and switch it back. On the NVLT, it will switch sources on audio loss, but it will not switch back. It has to be switched back manually. The touch screen is present on the GV, but not on the NVLT. And then there were other similarities there as well. So the options and spares on an NVLT, an OR-band inside is available on that as well. The extra power supply redundancy for exciters and controllers. The remote interface board, which I'll show you in a second. You had a preview when the slide jumped, but the UPS interface, which is which backs up the exciter and the controller. So if you have a brownout and a momentary power failure, it keeps power on those components, which allows for a smoother recovery. That's an option on these. There are breakout cables that you can get as well. So if you've ever looked on the back of one of our transmitters, like the VS and so forth, and you see a 25-pin D connector, and then you're tasked with having to wire a lot of wires into this 25-pin connector. We have pre-made cables as well that can help you break that 25-pin connector out, so that you don't have to wire all that yourself. And then there's a second exciter available in the NVLT as well, so that if the exciter failed, it would switch to the backup. This is what the remote interface option looks like. Without this option, you basically just get a 25-pin D connector, and you have to wire it to yourself. But this fans all of that out so that you can connect to these what we call Phoenix-type green connectors that you see at the top, a little bit more user-friendly to interface to. And then you've got surface mount push buttons on there that you can use to simulate your remote commands that would come in and issue, say, an on or an off, and you can simulate those by pushing on those small push buttons. And then the status is brought out as well in the form of LEDs, which will light up. Normally you wire all of these to a remote control system, but this is a way to fan all of that out for a little bit easier interfacing. Okay. Options and spares on the NVLT. These are all pretty much spare parts on the NVLT, so I won't spend a lot of time on that. Options on GV are pretty much the same. HD radio, of course, there's no upgrade path to HD radio in the NVLT. When someone does upgrade to HD radio, there's really 3 components that they're talking about. What's called an X-Gen card that goes in the exciter, an exporter, and an importer. And then with HD radio, you have the ability to create second and third channels, HD2, HD3, which people can tune to with independent programming. And that's what those components do. It adds around $28,000, less than that after discount, to end the price of any GV or VS transmitter, plus the HD radio license that's required from Ubiquity as well. Let's see. Here we go. Let's talk about the AM product line. Briefly here, we have a 50 at 25 kilowatt. We have an NX15 coming out soon, and we have an NX10, an NX5. All of those are three-phase power transmitters. We still make a single phase in the old model, which is an XR3 or an XR6 for single phase applications only. We've yet to do the new NX. The NX has an AUI, by the way. The older XR series doesn't have the AUI, so we've upgraded even the AM transmitters now with the AUI capability. For 1 kilowatt, we sell the transmitter that we've had for, I guess it's since about 2003 we've had this model, which is a J1000. It's really the only model left that does not have an AUI. The front panel AUI is only on the higher power transmitters, like the 25 or the 50, and then by way of the browser on the lower power 5 and 10 kilowatts. Email notifications, Nautel phone home, pretty much the same features that the AUI has on the on the FM transmitters that we described. The other thing that we've introduced in AM, is anybody here running any AM stations? Didn't think so. MDCL means modulation dependent carrier level. So AM transmitters now have the ability to run this special algorithm that saves them about 25 or 30% on their power bill, which becomes an attractive thing for a lot of AM operators to get that kind of power savings. And this is just, that basically describes what MDCL is, and I'll just skip through that, and we'll skip that. Spare parts for the AM line. This is the 1 kilowatt is the only one of these that's a rack mount transmitter. It just takes up about 23 inches, only weighs about 50 pounds. When you put it in a rack, it occupies approximately half the rack space, and very lightweight. It's got redundancy. It's got 2 PAs in it, so one of them can be removed, and the transmitter can continue to operate on one PA module. It also has a scheduler, because very often on AM stations have to change power at sunset. So it has a built-in scheduler which allows for automatic power change unattended, when that's required. And it has an optional web interface, but it's not an AUI. It's an older text-based something that we call the NX Link. Also, we usually sell it, usually is almost always included with an SPU1, which is a surge protector that comes with this transmitter. It's a separate box, but we usually package them together. And the surge protector protects not only the AC power, but the RF transmission line, and the control and audio lines going into it as well. Then the options for the J1000 are that optional web server, the rack kit, and so forth, and spares as well. On the TV transmitters, we do a 150, 250, and a 500. We had an NT1 1 kilowatt, and that's being reworked right now into a newer design. But we really got into television a few years ago because a lot of our international customers who buy our transmitters, very often in different parts of the world, the entity that runs the radio also operates the TV. And they told us, we like your radio transmitters. If you made TV transmitters, we'd buy them too. So we looked at the worldwide market and determined that about somewhere near 60% of the digital TV conversions that are yet to occur worldwide were actually in the low power end. Down in this power range. We tend to think of much higher power TV stations in the U.S. So we're not targeting the U.S. market for this necessarily, although we've sold a few to low LP TV stations in the U.S. But we developed it primarily for the opportunities that we'll have in the international market. Okay, let's see. Let's talk about Nautel training. So John Sims, who I had dinner with last night, reminded me to tell you all about the free training that we have on products at the factory. Every year at the NAB, of course, is the big spring event that most broadcasters or many broadcasters attend in Las Vegas. And right after that show, starting the weekend after that, up in Halifax, we conduct a 3-day training seminar that doesn't cost anything, but you do have to get there, and you have to pay for your own lodging. We cover a few or probably most of the meals, but it's a way to interact with other customers. It's an overview of all the products, so it's not in-depth on any one product. There might be a couple of sessions on each product, but it's an overview type of thing. The reason we do it right after NAB is that we have a lot of international dealers that come to the U.S. for the NAB show, and it's easier for them while they're in this hemisphere to just make a side trip after the NAB is over and come up to our factory. So we typically, we limit it to usually about 20 to 25 people, and usually about half of them happen to be our international dealers. But we open it up to any customers who want to come up as well. So if customers just want to take a little vacation up to Halifax, Nova Scotia in the springtime, and stop in and have this Nautel training, we offer that. We refer to it as the post-NAB training, and we offer that every year. Again, it's, of course, you could go to Canada now. You got to have a passport, and flights to Canada, they're actually a little bit lower this year. They got down to like about $500, but to typically about $600 to $700 round trip from almost anywhere in the U.S. To get up there. Now, we also do custom product training. It used to be that a lot of manufacturers would do training at their factory in the form of traditional classes that would last 2 or 3 days on a specific product. Back in the days when there was a lot of component level troubleshooting, where you had to really know the theory of how the transmitter worked in order to be able to troubleshoot. Well, nowadays, most of it, the diagnostics is done in software. We're swapping boards. The approach is completely different now. So we have a lot of our product training really online in the form of webinars that we do on a regular basis, and then we post the webinars on our website. Our webinars are also on YouTube. If you Google Nautel on YouTube, there are webinars on virtually every product. There are webinars on how to use the AUI and what the AUI will do. And that's the more virtual way that product training is done today. Nevertheless, we are still occasionally asked by some groups to do traditional training, and we do that on request, and we will do a custom training, design a training class, but it's a minimum of 3 people, a maximum of 6. The customers generally will, sometimes it's a particular group of radio stations that wants to send 6 engineers up there for training. And so we set a minimum of 3, maximum of 6. And this is the in-depth training that's on a specific product. And this really gets down into the real finer points of the operation of a particular, like a GV series transmitter. And we do charge for that about around $1,000 per person. But I just make you aware, not many people take advantage of that anymore because of the ease of which you can go on the internet now, and through our webinars you can learn a lot that way. I'm going to skip this live AUI. I want to go here and just kind of give you a. Do we have a few more minutes, or should we wrap it up here? I know you want to stay on schedule.
Yeah. Let's see if there's any questions.
Okay. All right, let's stop here and open up for questions. I do want to talk a little bit about, because it's in these last few slides, I want to talk about the Nautel Phone Home, what Nautel Phone Home is. We have the ability within all of our Nautel transmitters now that have the AUI, for that transmitter to communicate with the factory, and the factory does trend logging on critical parameters about once an hour of the transmitter. If you set it up to participate in Phone Home, which is a free service, it will, on an hourly basis, send out its critical parameters to be logged back at the factory. Now, it's not meant as a real-time notification service. In other words, the factory's not going to call you and say, we just noticed that you had this fail or you just went off the air. But they do trend logging, and they do review the logs on a regular basis. It's conceivable that if you call up with a problem, that they may already have a record of it. They may be able to go to the trend logs, and maybe it's possible that before they even call you back, they may be able to diagnose your problem based on what they might see in the trend logs. It sure beats the old method of having to read meter readings to the over the telephone to the technician at the other end. So it's a proactive form of maintenance. Does not cost anything. It's a free service that we offer, and basically you have to go in and configure that. Yes.
I understood when I asked about it before that they can tell you ahead of time, like, oh, you're gonna need a new power supply soon, or we're gonna be sending you this soon, because
Yeah.
we've seen this on the log, and they kind of, like you said, proactively,
Yeah.
y'all will tell us
Right.
when.
Sometimes, based on the parameters that they're seeing, they'll see that something is starting to fail. Let's say a fan starts to slow down, because we monitor with a tachometer the rotation of the fans. And if a fan started to slow down, they might say, look, this fan is starting to fail. We might recommend that you proactively replace that, or if it's under warranty, we'll send you a replacement or something like that. Or sometimes a power supply voltage starts to drop, and it's still within the operational range, but they can tell based on experience that because that particular meter reading is starting to drop, that we advise replacing this before it fails. So that, yeah, that you're correct about that. Yes, sir.
Does your sending out emails tell you like there's dead air?
Yes, there is one. There's a silent sense condition that will allow you. You can set the thresholds for that, and it will tell you if there's dead air. Now you don't. Obviously, if you set the thresholds, too high, or depending on how you set the thresholds, you can create nuisance alarms for yourself where you don't want to know about. But you can adjust the thresholds to be able to adjust for that. I should also point out that there is no security risk in this. This only sends data out. It does not allow anything in. So if you're concerned about Nautel getting into your networks or anything, this is very secure in that respect. Now, it does have the ability, if you check a particular box in there, which says allow service, that when customer service department is trying to troubleshoot a problem for you, they can get in there on a one-time basis if you check that box, and they can look around and diagnose things and maybe see things that you might not have seen. But once that session's over with, you can uncheck that box, and then Nautel can't get back in there, and it's very secure because it's only sending data out. Yes, sir. No, it has no dialing capabilities. Now, with respect to texting, that's really more a function of your carrier, because sometimes you can email to an email address that would convert it to a text and then send it to you, but that's all external to the transmitter capability. Yes.
We've tried using the streaming service as a backup for our audio.
Mm-hmm.
But what we found is that it only supports the Shoutcast version 1.
Okay.
It doesn't support DNAS 2,
Mm-hmm.
which is their current version. You know if there are any plans to?
I don't know. I'd have to check on that. I know it does have to be a public Shoutcast stream. I know that, and somewhere I answered this question for somebody a few months ago, and I had it written down, but I don't remember what the answer was right now without checking. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so we have a Nautel 300,
Mm-hmm.
and we're using more of a preset classical setting because we thought that would be kind of cleaner
Yeah.
and sharper.
Mm-hmm.
Are most of you guys doing that, or are you doing a custom fine-tuning of your setting?
Bill, are you using the Nautel, the Orban inside? I can't remember. No. Okay.
We have outboard processing, and we have it turned up pretty loud. Yeah, we seem to compete with the other stations.
Processing is such a subjective thing that.
The biggest complaint we got is people listen to regular radio, or they go to news somewhere else and come to us, and it's too low. And also with signals, or we don't have a full-blown signal, what people are doing is because you're running it lower, they're turning up the volume on the radio, it's bringing up all the noise.
We started with DFM. We started with the Rock Loud preset and then fine-tuned it from there. But we were using off-band audio processing. It was very expensive.
Mm-hmm.
The Orban inside option is it's been a home run for us.
What we do is we actually use like a soft rock processor, and we're processing outside the transmitters if we have to. The thing to do is like Bob said, listen around, right, and then determine what you like. And then you can try the different audio processing sounds in the Orban, key. Right? Because if you're mashing the audio, after about 10 minutes, the listener is tired.
One of the beauties of the AUI, you can pick a target person in your audience and go sit with them in their car or their home, and you use your phone and you start adjusting the processing while they're listening. So you can have key listeners that you're testing the audio on while you're sitting right there next to them and making the changes, kind of like going to the eye doctor, which is better, A or B. And you could do that type of thing and customize that processing for your age demographic and your audience.
Thank you, Gary.
Okay.
If there's any other questions, you're going to be
around
here for
for
a
a
little
while.
bit longer. So please talk to them. I was at the Las Vegas convention just with my family, and that was a great time to talk to their engineers. Excellent to be able to say, "This is the problem I have. Can you help me fix it?" So thank
I
you.
have business cards on the table back there. I also have, I don't have enough for everybody, but I have a handful of USB thumb drives that have our whole catalog on it, including this presentation. If anybody's interested, I just have probably 5 or 6.
Good, thank you. Okay, so we're a little bit onto our hard break, so we're going to go into our workshops now. Josh is doing recording and recording equipment and sound in the back, and then Rob Branch is doing FCC checklist. So if you guys, about 5 minutes, get to your workshops, then grab yourself a snack, water, come back. We'll start with Rob Branch.